It was April 2004, and the city of Fallujah was a name most Americans had never heard before. Within weeks, it would become synonymous with some of the bloodiest urban fighting the U.S. military had faced in decades. To the Marines and soldiers who were about to step into its narrow streets, it would become more than a battlefield. It would be a crucible of fire and fear, where every corner could hide death, and every doorway could be the last thing they saw. Located just 43 miles west of Baghdad, Fallujah was a sprawling city along the banks of the Euphrates River, with a population of over 300,000. It was known for its mosques, nearly 200 of them, and for being fiercely independent. Historically, Fallujah had resisted foreign influence, even under Saddam Hussein's regime. But after the US-led invasion of Iraq in 2003, the city quickly emerged as a hotbed of insurgent activity. It wasn't just the fighters who resisted. The population itself had little trust for American forces, seeing them as occupiers rather than liberators. The seeds of the coming battle were planted in the months following the invasion. While U.S. forces were focused on Baghdad and other major urban centers, Fallujah simmered. Insurgents, both local and foreign, began to organize. Weapons flowed in through a network of smuggling routes, and attacks on coalition convoys became more frequent. The city's tight-knit neighborhoods and labyrinth of alleyways made it nearly impossible for U.S. patrols to operate without being ambushed. Then came the event that would ignite the powder keg. On March 31, 2004, four American contractors from Blackwater, USA were ambushed while driving through the city. They were dragged from their vehicles, brutally beaten, killed, and their bodies mutilated. Two of them were hung from a bridge over the Euphrates while a crowd cheered below. Images of the scene flashed across global news networks, sending shockwaves back to the United States. To the American public, it was a horrifying symbol of chaos in Iraq. To the insurgents in Fallujah, it was a declaration they controlled this city. The White House and the Pentagon were outraged. Orders came down quickly: retake Fallujah and punish those responsible. But retaking a city like Fallujah wasn't as simple as sending in troops. The insurgents knew the terrain better than anyone. They had fortified positions inside houses, placed IEDs along likely approach routes, and stockpiled ammunition in mosques and schools. They didn't fight in open battle, they melted away into the civilian population, only to strike from the shadows. The Marines of the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force were tasked with the operation. For many of them, Fallujah would be their first taste of full-scale urban warfare since the Vietnam War. There was tension in the air as they prepared. Intelligence reports warned that every street could be booby-trapped, every rooftop a sniper's nest. Yet the mission was clear: go in, clear the city, and make sure such a public humiliation never happened again. On April 4, 2004, Operation Vigilant Resolve began. Tanks and armored Humvees rolled toward the city as helicopters circled overhead. The sound of distant explosions echoed as artillery began pounding suspected insurgent positions. The Marines advanced methodically, block by block, but progress was slow. They weren't just fighting an enemy. They were fighting in a maze where the walls could explode at any moment. The first firefights erupted almost immediately as Marines pushed into the city's outskirts. Insurgents fired from windows, disappeared through side streets, then reappeared behind U.S. lines. The Marines responded with overwhelming firepower, but every shot risked hitting civilians. And civilians were everywhere. Men, women, and children who hadn't left, either out of fear or loyalty to the insurgents. That meant every decision carried a moral weight. Was that man walking toward them an innocent shopkeeper or someone with a hidden detonator? Within days, the battle turned into a stalemate. The insurgents were disciplined and knew when to retreat. They used the dense urban terrain to negate the Marines' technological advantage. Night vision goggles were useless in pitch-black interiors where insurgents waited silently for the perfect ambush. And while the Marines had air support, dropping bombs on an entire neighborhood risked destroying half the city and killing civilians by the dozens. Journalists embedded with the Marines captured the intensity of the fighting, but they also showed the civilian toll. Footage of wounded children and bombed-out homes began to circulate, and pressure mounted both in Iraq and internationally for the U.S. to halt the offensive. Political leaders in Baghdad, already struggling to maintain legitimacy, feared that the destruction of Fallujah would alienate the Sunni population completely. By late April, under political pressure, the Marines were ordered to pull back and hand control of the city to an Iraqi-led security force called the Fallujah Brigade. To the Marines, it felt like leaving the job unfinished. They had lost brothers in the fight and now had to watch as insurgents celebrated in the streets. The Fallujah Brigade, made up largely of former Iraqi army officers, was supposed to keep order. But within weeks, it became clear they had no real control. Many of its members were sympathetic to the insurgency, and some even handed over weapons and equipment to them. By the summer of 2004, Fallujah was firmly in insurgent hands. It became a safe haven for fighters across Iraq, a place where they could regroup, train, and plan attacks. For the U.S. military, this was unacceptable. Plans began for a second, much larger offensive, one that would not stop until the city was completely under coalition control, no matter the cost. But for the Marines who had fought there in April, the memories lingered. They remembered the claustrophobic streets, the deafening echoes of gunfire between concrete walls, the smell of smoke and cordite hanging in the air. They remembered the faces of civilians caught in the middle, terrified mothers clutching their children, old men shouting angrily as soldiers searched their homes. They knew that going back into Fallujah would be even harder the second time. The insurgents would have spent months preparing, turning the city into a fortress of death. The stage was set for one of the deadliest urban battles in modern American history. The fight to retake Fallujah would push the Marines and soldiers involved to their limits, physically, mentally, and morally. It would test their training, their courage, and their ability to hold onto their humanity in a place where every instinct screamed for survival above all else. And when it was over, the name Fallujah would be etched into the annals of U.S. military history, not just as a battle, but as a warning about the true cost of war in the streets. The city waited, silent but deadly, like a coiled serpent ready to strike again. By early November 2004, the U.S. military was preparing to return to Fallujah. The first offensive had failed to secure the city, leaving the insurgents emboldened and the civilian population wary. Every Marine and soldier who had fought in the streets during Operation Vigilant Resolve remembered the narrow alleys, the claustrophobic buildings, and the feeling that death could be hiding around every corner. Now, months later, they were tasked with something far more daunting. A full-scale assault, meticulously planned, designed to reclaim Fallujah completely. The buildup was enormous. Thousands of Marines from the 1st Marine Division and soldiers from the U.S. Army began amassing outside the city. Heavy artillery, tanks, armored vehicles, and helicopters were staged along the periphery. Engineers were working to clear routes and construct forward operating bases that could serve as staging points for the urban assault. Intelligence officers pored over satellite images, maps, and surveillance footage, trying to anticipate every insurgent position, every potential ambush, every trap hidden in the city's dense fabric. Psychologically, the soldiers faced an uphill battle. Many had been in Fallujah before, witnessing the chaos, the loss of comrades, the civilians caught in the crossfire. They knew that the insurgents had been preparing for this second assault for months, fortifying buildings, laying improvised explosive devices, and positioning snipers in perfect vantage points. Fear was inevitable, but it was tempered with determination. Every Marine understood the stakes. This was not just a mission. It was a test of endurance, strategy, and moral courage. The planning emphasized coordination like never before. Units were divided into small teams, each responsible for specific blocks, streets, or neighborhoods. Air support was synchronized to strike simultaneously on multiple targets, while artillery and armored vehicles provided cover fire to prevent the insurgents from concentrating their defenses. Engineers moved with combat teams, clearing booby-trapped buildings, disabling improvised explosive devices, and marking safe routes through the urban labyrinth. The psychological preparation was equally rigorous. Briefings were long and detailed, describing the city not as it looked now, but as it would be in the heat of battle. Soldiers were warned that civilians would be everywhere, that insurgents would use human shields, that ambushes could come from any angle, and that each step could be the difference between life and death. Commanders reminded them constantly, minimize civilian casualties, maintain discipline, and hold together as a unit. When the first Marines crossed into Fallujah on November 7, 2004, the city was eerily quiet. Shops were shuttered, streets deserted, windows blacked out. But that calm was deceptive. Insurgents had prepared their defenses with precision. As the Marines advanced, rifle fire erupted from hidden positions, from buildings, rooftops, and alleyways. Each corner became a potential death trap. Snipers fired from elevated positions, forcing teams to take cover behind armored vehicles or debris. The insurgents were small in number but highly mobile, striking swiftly and then disappearing into the maze of the city. The intensity of the battle was unlike anything most of the soldiers had experienced. Explosions rocked buildings, sending showers of dust and debris into the streets. Rockets and grenades hit armored vehicles, shattering windows and denting metal. The smell of smoke, cordite, and blood hung heavy in the air. Marines moved methodically, clearing buildings room by room, street by street, each movement slow, deliberate, and deadly. Civilians were trapped in the crossfire. Many fled when they could, while others hid in basements, attics, or abandoned buildings. Some insurgents forced civilians to act as shields, creating moral dilemmas for the Marines who needed to advance but could not fire indiscriminately. Every engagement required split-second decisions, weighing the value of a life against the necessity of neutralizing threats. Snipers played a critical role in the battle, picking off insurgents from distant rooftops while coordinating with ground teams to secure streets and intersections. Helicopters hovered above, scanning the city and providing rapid support, their rotors cutting through the roar of gunfire. Yet even air support was limited. Narrow streets and dense buildings reduced the effectiveness of aerial bombardment. Every operation required precision, coordination, and trust among units. The battle quickly evolved into a relentless cycle of house-to-house clearing. Marines entered buildings with teams of 4 to 6, checking each room, hallway, and stairwell. Insurgents used hidden tunnels, floorboards, and basements to avoid capture, emerging unpredictably to strike at the Marines or retreating to new positions. The constant threat of booby traps and improvised explosive devices forced engineers to move carefully, often under fire. In one particularly intense sector, a group of Marines encountered an insurgent ambush inside a residential complex. Gunfire erupted from every floor, and explosions tore through walls. The Marines returned fire with precision, moving room by room, clearing the building inch by inch. It was exhausting work, physically and mentally. Each cleared building meant they were closer to securing the city, but each building also revealed the ingenuity and determination of their adversaries. Communication was key. Radio operators relayed coordinates, requests for medevac, and tactical updates. Ground commanders coordinated movements between units, while artillery and air support adjusted their fire based on real-time feedback. The operation required a level of coordination that few soldiers had experienced, blending technology, human intelligence, and sheer courage under fire. Despite the overwhelming firepower and meticulous planning, casualties mounted. Marines were injured by sniper fire, rocket-propelled grenades, and improvised explosive devices. Each casualty affected unit morale, forcing teams to make rapid decisions about evacuation, reinforcement, and continued advancement. Medics moved through the streets, under fire, providing life-saving treatment wherever possible. The intensity of the battle was a constant reminder of the high cost of urban warfare. As the days wore on, insurgents continued to resist fiercely. They coordinated ambushes, fortified buildings, and used civilians to complicate the Americans' advance. Yet the Marines' discipline, training, and resilience allowed them to maintain momentum. Each sector secured represented progress, a foothold in a city designed to trap and kill. By mid-November, after intense fighting, American forces had made significant gains. Key neighborhoods were under coalition control, insurgent positions had been neutralized, and the city's center was within reach. But even as they pushed forward, the human cost of the operation became apparent. Entire neighborhoods were devastated, civilian casualties mounted, and the psychological toll on the soldiers was profound. Every Marine carried the weight of the mission's moral and strategic complexity. They were tasked not only with defeating an enemy but with protecting civilians and adhering to strict rules of engagement. Every decision, every shot fired, had consequences far beyond the immediate battlefield. By the end of the second week, the city was largely under coalition control. Insurgents had been driven to the outskirts or forced into hiding. Yet the Battle of Fallujah had left an indelible mark on everyone involved. Streets bore the scars of heavy fighting, buildings were destroyed or damaged, and the civilian population had suffered immensely. For the Marines and soldiers, the lessons of Fallujah were immediate and personal. Urban warfare was brutal, unpredictable, and psychologically draining. Success required not just firepower but patience, coordination, and respect for the human terrain. Those who survived carried memories that would never fade. The smell of smoke and cordite, the cries of the wounded, the silence that followed the final gunfire. Fallujah became a symbol, a testament to the courage and resilience of the American forces, and a warning of the challenges of modern urban combat. The Second Offensive had succeeded tactically, but it came at a tremendous cost. It reshaped the way the U.S. military approached urban warfare, influencing doctrine, training, and operational planning for years to come. And for the city itself, the battle would never be forgotten. The streets, the buildings, the very air seemed to carry the weight of the dead and the memories of the living. Fallujah had survived, but it would bear the scars of that November forever. The streets of Fallujah had become a labyrinth of death. The Second Offensive had begun days ago, but the city resisted with every breath, every corner, every alley. For the Marines and soldiers fighting within, every step was a gamble. Buildings that once stood as homes and shops were now fortresses of insurgents, rigged with explosives, snipers, and hidden traps. The hum of urban warfare was constant. Distant explosions, the staccato bursts of rifles, the screams of the wounded, and the quiet, tense moments of soldiers moving through rooms, stairwells, and courtyards. House by house, block by block, American forces advanced. The urban terrain negated many of their technological advantages. Tanks could not maneuver easily through narrow streets. Helicopters were vulnerable to rocket-propelled grenades. Artillery strikes risked killing civilians trapped in their homes. Commanders emphasized small unit tactics. Squads of Marines clearing one building at a time, moving methodically, covering each other's movements, coordinating with snipers and support fire from nearby streets. Inside a crumbling apartment complex, a team of Marines moved silently, clearing room after room. The floorboards creaked under their boots. Dust choked the air. In the shadows, insurgents waited, their AK-47s and pistols trained on every doorway. A sudden gunshot cracked the silence, followed by return fire. One Marine fell, clutching his leg as blood seeped through his uniform. His squad mates dragged him behind cover, returning fire while a medic worked to stabilize him. Every engagement was a test of nerves, training, and instinct. Snipers perched on rooftops became critical assets. One Marine, perched on a half-destroyed building, scanned the streets through his scope. He spotted an insurgent preparing to ambush a squad below. One precise shot later, the threat was neutralized. Yet even with sharpshooters covering them, every movement carried risk. Insurgents could appear from hidden tunnels, stairwells, or debris, forcing Marines to constantly adapt and anticipate. The battle was not only physical but psychological. Soldiers were under relentless stress, aware that one misstep could be fatal. The constant exposure to death and destruction weighed heavily on them. In the midst of the chaos, small acts of heroism became monumental. A Marine would dash into open streets to rescue a wounded comrade, dragging him through a hail of bullets to safety. Another would risk exposing himself to neutralize a sniper threatening an entire squad. These acts were the difference between life and death, between mission success and failure. Explosions tore through buildings with terrifying regularity. Improvised explosive devices hidden in doorways, stairwells, and vehicles detonated without warning. The sound was deafening. Dust and debris filled the air, reducing visibility to a few feet. Soldiers relied on training and instincts, moving with precision, checking every room, every closet, every hidden corner. Urban warfare in Fallujah was unlike any other fight. They were fighting in a living city, a place where every structural feature could become a weapon. The insurgents adapted quickly. They employed snipers, ambushes, and decoy attacks to slow the American advance. Civilians were often used as shields, creating moral and tactical dilemmas. Every decision had consequences. Marines had to balance aggression with restraint, ensuring that minimizing civilian casualties didn't compromise the mission. Every street secured was a hard-fought victory, a testament to the soldiers' discipline and courage. One of the most intense engagements occurred in the western sector of the city. A squad of Marines encountered insurgents entrenched in a series of connected buildings. The firefight was relentless. Roofs collapsed, walls were shattered, and every corridor seemed to hide an enemy. The squad leader coordinated movements, directing suppressive fire while small teams cleared rooms. Medics moved under fire, treating the wounded in the narrow confines of hallways, relying on speed and skill to save lives. The air support was crucial. Apache helicopters circled above, firing rockets and machine gun bursts to disrupt insurgent positions. But the insurgents had learned to exploit the urban environment, hiding in alleys, using underground passages, and emerging unpredictably. Every strike risked collateral damage, forcing pilots to exercise precision while under fire from RPGs. The coordination between ground forces and air support was a delicate ballet, executed under the pressure of combat and the threat of constant ambush. Despite the chaos, progress was being made. Each cleared building, each secured street, brought the Americans closer to the heart of Fallujah. The city's center remained a fortress of resistance, but the relentless pressure of disciplined urban combat was gradually wearing down the insurgents. Every action, every sweep, required careful planning, courage, and resilience. The human cost was severe. Marines and soldiers were wounded daily, some gravely. The psychological toll was immense. Many carried the trauma of seeing comrades killed, civilians injured, and the devastation of a city they had vowed to protect. Yet amidst the destruction, acts of solidarity and heroism shone through. Soldiers shared their water, food, and ammunition. They risked their lives for each other in ways that statistics and reports could never fully capture. In one harrowing moment, a Marine platoon found itself pinned down in a narrow street by insurgent fire from multiple angles. Ammunition was low, casualties mounting, and retreat seemed impossible. The platoon leader radioed for support, coordinating a flanking maneuver while a team provided covering fire. Every decision was a life-or-death gamble. Eventually, the platoon broke through, rescuing wounded comrades and neutralizing the insurgent threat. Such moments define the battle. Courage under fire, ingenuity, and teamwork in the face of overwhelming odds. The battle raged day and night. Soldiers rarely rested, moving from one sector to another, clearing buildings and securing streets. The urban environment made logistics challenging. Supplies had to be delivered under fire. Medics moved continuously, triaging and evacuating the wounded. Communication was vital, with radio operators linking ground teams, commanders, and air support in a seamless network of coordination. By late November, the second offensive had reached its climax. Key insurgent positions were captured, supply lines disrupted, and the city's center was finally under coalition control. The fighting did not end immediately, but the tide had turned. The combination of overwhelming force, meticulous planning, and relentless courage had overcome the insurgent defenses. Yet the aftermath revealed the true cost. Civilian casualties, destruction of homes, and the psychological scars on both soldiers and civilians underscored the brutal reality of urban warfare. Fallujah was reclaimed, but the victory came at a tremendous human and moral price. Soldiers who had fought in the streets would carry the memories for life. Scenes of destruction, the cries of the wounded, the deaths of comrades, and the resilience of those who survived. In the end, Fallujah became more than a battlefield. It was a testament to the challenges of modern urban combat, a study in courage, strategy, and the human capacity to endure unimaginable hardship. The lessons learned in those streets reshaped American military doctrine, highlighting the complexity of urban operations, the necessity of intelligence, and the importance of preparation and coordination. The city's residents, many of whom had been caught in the crossfire, bore the scars as well. The streets and buildings were damaged, families displaced, and lives forever altered. For the Americans, Fallujah was a mission completed. For the insurgents, it was a lesson in resilience and the limits of conventional force. For the world, it was a stark reminder that urban warfare is not only about strategy and firepower. It is about survival, humanity, and the thin line between victory and devastation. As the smoke lifted over Fallujah, the city bore the scars of weeks of relentless combat. Streets were littered with rubble, burned-out vehicles, and the remnants of makeshift barricades that insurgents had erected. Buildings that had once housed families, shops, and offices were now gutted shells, their interiors blackened by fire and torn apart by explosives. The eerie silence between gunfire bursts was a stark reminder of the city's devastation and the cost of urban warfare. American forces moved carefully through the city, consolidating their positions and securing key sectors. The intensity of the fighting had forced insurgents into the shadows, but intelligence officers knew the threat had not disappeared. Small pockets of resistance remained, and booby traps and IEDs continued to endanger both soldiers and civilians. Clearing operations required methodical precision. Every building had to be checked, every street surveyed, every suspicious object investigated. Marines and soldiers established command posts and temporary bases throughout Fallujah, using armored vehicles and fortified positions to maintain control over the streets. Engineers worked tirelessly to remove explosives and rebuild infrastructure where possible, while medics attended to the wounded and ensured that civilians received emergency care. The city was far from safe, but the coalition forces were determined to maintain their hold and prevent a resurgence of insurgent activity. The resistance that remained was cunning and dangerous. Insurgents used underground tunnels, hidden caches, and knowledge of the city's layout to continue their attacks. Snipers would fire from rooftops, disappearing before retaliation could be mounted. Ambushes occurred in narrow alleys, where Marines had to advance with extreme caution. The insurgents' use of the urban environment as a weapon highlighted the unique challenges of street-to-street combat. Despite the chaos, the Marines showed remarkable discipline. Small unit tactics were employed to maintain order and minimize casualties. Teams worked in coordinated sweeps, securing one block at a time, while artillery and air support provided overwatch from safer positions. Soldiers communicated constantly, ensuring that every movement was synchronized and that all units remained aware of potential threats. The human cost of the battle was staggering. Hundreds of insurgents had been killed, yet casualties among coalition forces were significant. Marines and soldiers had endured relentless firefights, exposure to explosives, and the psychological toll of constant danger. Medics faced an unending stream of wounded, requiring split-second decisions to save lives under fire. Each day brought new challenges, testing the endurance and resilience of every soldier in the city. Civilians were caught in the middle of this ferocious struggle. Many had fled, seeking refuge in surrounding areas or makeshift shelters. Others remained, trapped by fear or circumstance. Humanitarian organizations worked to provide food, water, and medical care, navigating the dangers of a city still crawling with unexploded ordnance. The psychological impact on the population was immense. Families had lost homes, friends, and loved ones, and the city they had once known was now a battlefield. American commanders understood that securing Fallujah required more than defeating insurgents. It required winning the trust of the civilian population. Patrols emphasized protection and assistance, not just combat operations. Soldiers distributed water and medical supplies, assisted in rebuilding efforts, and worked with local leaders to restore a semblance of normalcy. Yet the scars of war ran deep, and many residents remained wary, their faith in security forces shaken by months of violence. In addition to civilian concerns, coalition forces had to remain vigilant against insurgent counterattacks. Ambushes and roadside bombings continued even after the main offensive had subsided. Soldiers adapted, employing new tactics, monitoring intelligence, and increasing security measures. Every day in Fallujah was a reminder that the battle was not over simply because the streets were occupied. It was an ongoing struggle to maintain control and prevent resurgence. One of the most harrowing aspects of consolidation was dealing with the psychological toll on troops. Marines and soldiers had witnessed extraordinary violence and faced constant life-threatening situations. Rest periods were brief, and sleep was often interrupted by explosions or gunfire. Commanders provided counseling and support where possible, recognizing that the emotional and mental health of soldiers was as critical as their physical safety. Amidst the rubble and destruction, moments of humanity and heroism continued to emerge. Soldiers would rescue civilians trapped in damaged buildings, medics would provide care under fire, and small acts of kindness reminded both soldiers and residents that compassion could survive even in the darkest circumstances. These acts, though often overshadowed by the intensity of battle, were crucial to maintaining morale and reinforcing the values that the military sought to uphold. By the end of November, Fallujah was largely under coalition control. The city had been reclaimed, but at an enormous cost. The battle had destroyed homes, businesses, and infrastructure, and the civilian population had suffered tremendously. Marines and soldiers had endured weeks of relentless combat, witnessing death and destruction on an unprecedented scale. Yet their training, courage, and discipline had allowed them to achieve their mission objectives, demonstrating the resilience and adaptability required in modern urban warfare. Political and strategic implications were immediate. The successful retaking of Fallujah sent a powerful message to insurgent forces across Iraq. The coalition would respond decisively to resistance, and urban strongholds could not remain unchallenged. Yet it also underscored the challenges of military occupation, urban combat, and the delicate balance between achieving tactical objectives and minimizing civilian harm. Lessons learned in Fallujah would inform future operations, shaping doctrine, tactics, and training for years to come. For the soldiers who had fought in Fallujah, the memories were lasting. They carried the weight of loss, the images of destruction, and the trauma of combat. Some would leave Iraq changed forever, bearing scars visible and invisible. Others would continue to serve, using their experiences to mentor new troops and prepare them for the challenges of urban warfare. The bonds forged in the crucible of Fallujah, between squads, platoons, and units, would endure as a testament to the human spirit under fire. As coalition forces worked to stabilize Fallujah, the city began the slow process of recovery. Infrastructure projects, humanitarian aid, and security measures sought to rebuild what had been lost. Streets were cleared of rubble, homes and businesses repaired where possible, and displaced residents gradually returned. Yet the legacy of the battle remained, etched into the city's streets and the memories of all who had lived through it. The story of Fallujah was not just a military narrative. It was a human story of resilience, courage, and the costs of conflict. The battle demonstrated the complexities of urban warfare, the interplay between combat and civilian considerations, and the enduring impact on both soldiers and residents. For historians, strategists, and military planners, Fallujah became a case study in modern combat, illustrating the challenges of occupying and pacifying urban centers in conflict zones. The city itself, though scarred, survived. Its residents endured, rebuilt, and remembered. Fallujah became a symbol, not just of destruction and resistance, but of the human capacity to endure, recover, and move forward in the aftermath of unimaginable violence. For the Marines and soldiers who fought there, it was a defining chapter of their service, a testament to courage under fire, the importance of discipline and coordination, and the reality that victory in urban warfare comes at a profound cost. And so, as the last pockets of resistance were cleared and the city stabilized, Fallujah stood as a stark reminder of the realities of modern combat. A city transformed by fire, a population tested by violence, and soldiers pushed to the limits of endurance and humanity. The lessons learned, the sacrifices made, and the courage displayed would resonate far beyond the streets of Fallujah, shaping the understanding of urban warfare for generations to come. As December 2004 approached, The battle for Fallujah had reached its conclusion, but the city remained far from calm. American forces had retaken the streets, neutralized major insurgent strongholds, and cleared most of the city's center, yet the echoes of the fighting lingered everywhere. The destruction was absolute. Shattered buildings, burnt-out vehicles, and rubble-strewn streets marked the landscape like a scar on the city itself. For both soldiers and civilians, the end of active combat did not mean an end to suffering. The Marines and Army units who had fought so relentlessly were physically and mentally exhausted. Weeks of continuous operations had taken a toll on their bodies and minds. Many carried injuries, some visible and some hidden, while countless others struggled with the psychological weight of seeing friends killed, civilians harmed, and the city's destruction. Soldiers were lauded for their bravery, but they returned from Fallujah changed men and women, hardened by combat yet deeply aware of the human cost of war. In the aftermath, American commanders worked tirelessly to consolidate control over the city. Patrols continued to sweep streets, check buildings, and respond to sporadic insurgent attacks. Engineers cleared rubble, disposed of explosives, and restored basic infrastructure where possible. Medics and humanitarian workers treated the wounded, assisted displaced families, and coordinated aid to help the population survive amidst the devastation. Even amid hardship, small victories emerged. Children returned to makeshift schools, markets reopened in cleared areas, and life cautiously began to reestablish itself. Yet the human cost was staggering. Hundreds of insurgents had died, many civilians had been killed or injured, and thousands had been displaced from their homes. Entire neighborhoods lay in ruins. Families mourned the loss of loved ones, while those who survived faced the challenge of rebuilding not just their homes but their lives. The physical devastation mirrored the psychological trauma endured by residents, leaving scars that would endure for generations. Strategically, the fall of Fallujah sent a powerful message across Iraq and beyond. The coalition had demonstrated its willingness and ability to reclaim territory even in the most challenging urban environments. The operation showed that insurgent-held cities could be challenged successfully, but it also highlighted the immense costs of urban warfare. The lives lost, the infrastructure destroyed, and the deep-seated resentment that could fuel future resistance. Politically, the battle resonated on multiple levels. The U.S. government faced scrutiny over civilian casualties, media coverage painted a stark picture of urban destruction, and Iraqi leaders had to navigate the delicate task of rebuilding trust among Sunni populations who felt abandoned or targeted. Fallujah became a focal point of debate about the nature of the conflict in Iraq, the ethics of urban combat, and the long-term strategy needed to stabilize the country. Soldiers reflected on the lessons learned. Urban warfare required meticulous planning, intelligence gathering, and small unit cohesion. Training in urban combat, coordination with air support, and the ability to adapt quickly to unexpected threats became essential. The experiences in Fallujah informed future operations, reshaping doctrine and preparing new generations of Marines and soldiers for the complexities of fighting in densely populated environments. The battle also underscored the psychological dimension of war. Soldiers had to make split-second decisions with profound moral consequences. Every encounter carried the risk of civilian casualties or the death of comrades. Maintaining discipline and humanity under fire was as critical as tactical success. Many Marines carried the memories of Fallujah with them for life. The cries of the wounded, the devastation of neighborhoods, and the camaraderie that allowed them to endure. Civilians, meanwhile, faced the daunting task of recovery. Neighborhoods needed reconstruction, essential services had to be restored, and displaced families required housing and support. International organizations worked alongside local authorities to provide aid, but the scale of the devastation was immense. Residents had to navigate a city still filled with the remnants of battle, collapsed buildings, unexploded ordnance, and streets scarred by weeks of relentless fighting. Stories of individual heroism emerged from the rubble. Marines and soldiers risked their lives to save civilians, evacuate the wounded, and neutralize threats. Medics treated the injured under fire, often at great personal risk. Snipers provided cover for advancing units, preventing ambushes and protecting lives. These acts were not just tactical maneuvers. They were testaments to courage, sacrifice, and the human spirit in the midst of chaos. The insurgents who survived were forced to adapt. Many fled to surrounding areas, regrouping and seeking to carry out attacks elsewhere. Fallujah streets, while under coalition control, had become a symbol of the challenges of insurgency and the realities of urban combat. The city's experience would be studied in military academies worldwide, providing insights into both the dangers of fighting in urban environments and the importance of coordination, intelligence, and adaptability. In the months following the battle, efforts to rebuild and stabilize Fallujah continued. Schools reopened, markets slowly returned to life, and basic services were restored. Yet the memories of combat lingered. For the residents, the city would never be the same. The psychological and social impact of the fighting had left deep and lasting impressions. Families mourned those lost, communities were fractured, and the landscape itself bore visible and permanent marks of war. The legacy of Fallujah extended beyond its streets. For the U.S. military, it became a defining example of modern urban warfare. The battle highlighted the balance between force and restraint, the necessity of precise intelligence, and the importance of coordination between ground troops, engineers, medics, and air support. It reinforced the idea that success in urban combat required not just firepower but discipline, strategy, and humanity. For the world, Fallujah became a case study in the complexity of modern conflict. It illustrated the high cost of reclaiming insurgent-held cities, the challenges of protecting civilians in war zones, and the psychological toll of prolonged combat. The battle also raised ethical and strategic questions about occupation, reconstruction, and the long-term consequences of military interventions in densely populated areas. Veterans of Fallujah carried their experiences home, sharing stories of bravery, sacrifice, and survival. Many found ways to support each other, coping with trauma and rebuilding their lives while honoring the memories of comrades who did not return. Their testimonies ensured that the human dimension of the battle would not be forgotten, offering lessons to military planners, historians, and policymakers alike. Ultimately, the story of Fallujah was one of resilience. The city, though scarred and battered, survived. Its residents endured unimaginable hardship, rebuilt their lives, and faced the daunting task of restoring their communities. The soldiers who fought there displayed extraordinary courage and discipline, navigating one of the deadliest urban battles in modern American history. And the lessons learned, the tactical, strategic, and human, would resonate far beyond the boundaries of the city itself. Fallujah had been a crucible of fire, testing the limits of both soldiers and civilians. It demonstrated the brutality and complexity of urban warfare, while highlighting the courage and humanity that can emerge even in the darkest circumstances. The city's streets, buildings, and residents carried the legacy of the battle, a reminder of what was lost, what was endured, and what was ultimately reclaimed. As historians, military strategists, and policymakers reflected on the battle, one truth became clear: urban combat is as much about human resilience as it is about tactics and firepower. Victory is measured not only in territory gained or enemies neutralized, but in the ability to preserve life, maintain discipline, and adapt to an environment where danger is omnipresent and the stakes are unimaginably high. For those who lived through Fallujah, soldiers and civilians alike, the city became a symbol of endurance, sacrifice, and the unbreakable human spirit. It was a place where courage met chaos, where strategy met survival, and where the true costs of war were made visible. And while the battle had ended, its lessons would endure, shaping the understanding of urban warfare and the memory of a city forever marked by fire and shadow. The story of Fallujah was not just a military chapter. It was a human story. It was about survival against overwhelming odds, about courage in the face of relentless danger, and about the enduring spirit of those who refused to surrender to the chaos surrounding them. The city, its people, and the soldiers who fought there would carry this story forward, ensuring that the lessons of bravery, sacrifice, and resilience would never be forgotten. As the last patrols secured the remaining streets and engineers cleared the final unexploded devices, a sense of somber achievement settled over the city. The battle was over, but the memories and lessons would echo forever. Fallujah had survived, the soldiers had endured, and the world had witnessed a chapter of war that would never be forgotten.